about translation. So here we have Icarus studiosus volandi alies huc illuc movit nexe supra humum liberare potuit. Alle me sustenere non possunt inquint. Tu doce me velare statum Daedalus alies levavit et nisi elis recte movis inquit. Velare non potest, imitare me how difficilis es ars volandi. So we have, as we know, we got to have the vocab and the verb and the endings. That's what Latin is all about. So we have Icarus, and then we have studiosus, which is our adjective. Again, I pulled this up for us before this video. So you'll have to use Whitaker's Words or Dictionary. Here it's used as an adjective, as you can see. And eagerly, keenly, zealously, perhaps not studiously, given the context of the story. He clearly is not listening to his father. Hence his tragic end. So, eagerly might be a good translation here. So Icarus eagerly, literally wanting to fly, the wings here and there. So we put all together is that Icarus eagerly moving his wings for flying here and there. But, so Nick is kind of introducing a kind of a contrast here, but he was not able to raise himself above the ground. So once again, I'm giving you a rather literal translation and writing. It's hard to write and talk at the same time. You can go back and smooth out your translations as per common sense. But here we have our verb in the past tense of possum. So this is this third person singular. Here we have our infinitive over here on the right. Of course, we do have the word in English to levitate, which has some idea of raising above the ground. But tolere also means to raise. And then when we use supra, it's always followed by the accusative. So second declension accusative singular is and in this case it means ground. So we put all together is that Icarus eagerly was wanting to move his wings for flying here and there. In other words, he was wanting to move them rapidly, but he wasn't able to lift himself off the ground. And then he says that the wings are not able to literally to sustain me. So he thinks there's something wrong with the wings. Teach me, he's talking to his father, Daedalus, teach me to fly. So my wings aren't able to, I'm not able to use these wings. Teach me to fly. It's another good example where English likes to use I very often. Other languages, Latin is not unique. German is the same way. I could list many other languages. English is a very I-centered language. But literally the wings are not able to sustain me. In other words, I'm not able to fly with these wings is what we would say in English, perhaps. So teach me. So here we have the imperative form of docere, which means to teach. Teach me to fly with our infinitive, to, of course, referring to Daedalus. And then statum means at once. So at once, Daedalus raises his wings, and he says, unless you move the wings correctly. So here he's talking, context makes it clear he's talking to his son Icarus again. So nisi just means unless. Once again, if you're not sure on the vocab, you have to look these up in a dictionary, Whitaker's Words. So unless you move, we know this is our subject and verb, second person singular ending in S. And then here is our, using our Latin declensions, we have first declension, accusative plural, I autem is ace. So that's our accusative direct object, the wings. and then recte means correctly or rightly. So unless you move them correctly, Daedalus says, you're not able to fly. So non potes volare. Literally imitate me. So do as I do. The art of flying, ars volandi, is not difficult. Literally hardly difficult. So if you do as I do, we can fly like a bird. It's not that difficult if you listen to your old man here. But of course he doesn't. So then he tells them using the imperative. So move is the imperative, second person singular. He says, move the wings. Here they have some helpful vocab. Cerso means up. Deorso means down. So move your wings up and down. Hoc modo means in this manner. So move your wings up and down in this manner. And thus, the father taught his son the art of flying. So again, that's a rather literal translation. It sounds a little bit wooden in English. So, and thus the father taught, there's our past tense of docio docere, docui doctum, his son, suum filium. We know that's the direct object, second person accusative singular. And then he taught him the art, which is third declension accusative, em ending, and then here's our gerendive of flying, volandi, like volition. Tamquam avis pulos suos, just as a bird teaches, literally its young, like a pullet chicken. So he taught his son rather, the art of flying, just as a bird teaches its fledgling birds. So, tum puorum oscillatus pratisumus ad volandum inquit, sed prius hoc demonio, vole post me in medio aere inter caelum et terram, nam si in fimo aere prope mare volabis, pennae humidae fient, sin volebis in sumo aere prope caelum, ignis solis ceram moliet, atque penis urret. Noli nimis audax esse in volando, cautus esto mi filii, iam sequere meis carcerum nostrum mi fugimus, liberi sumus. So tum means then. We've had this many times also in the Wheelock's Latin. It's just an adverb of transition. Then he kissed. This means to kiss, as you may recall from Catullus. And then we know that the father kissed the son because the son is in the accusative second declension. So this is just our participle. Then he kissed his son, and he says, we are prepared to fly. So parati sumus ad volandum, get ready for takeoff. And they give you some of their vocab over here, that puerum oscillatus, because participles can be a little bit tricky, is afterwards. The son, literally the son was kissed. So this note perhaps isn't as helpful as just identifying the simple participle here. Then we are prepared to fly. But first, said Prius, but first, I advise you this, or I must give you this warning, or but first, listen to me. But literally, monio means to advise. This is actually in chapter 1. In the Wheelock's Latin, as you may recall. Sed prius hoc te monio. So we've had most of this vocabulary, but first I advise you this. Fly after me in the middle of the air between the sky and the ground. Once again, that's a rather literal translation, but literally, but first I must warn you, fly with me between the sky and the ground. For if, so C means if, for if, here's the future tense, our verb, so literally, if you will fly too low, infimo means too low, You can give you some vocab over here. If not, just look it up. Think of inferno or hell. Doesn't mean hell here, but if you fly too low in the air, so infimo arre, if you fly too low in the air, so the ablative is always a little bit tricky because you got to come up with the correct phrasing. But here you can see we have our ablative endings, second declension, third declension, respectively. Near the sea, what will happen? That the feathers, the pennae, will become wet, like humid. So he says, don't fly too low to the sea, otherwise the feathers are going to become wet. Seen means but however, or but if you literally will fly, but if you fly too high in the air, near the sky, in other words, too high up in the air, the fire of the sun, or just the sun, we might say in English, the sun will soften the wax. Remember, he built these feathers out of wax, or with wax. And so do it right in the middle. The golden mean seems to be the moral of the story. Of course, we all know that in life is all about avoiding extremes, fanaticism, dogmatism, not taking things too seriously, but also not too lightly, and so on and so forth. So if you fly too close to the sun, that the feathers will burn. So yuret penes here. One of the nice things this book does that really goes through the different transformations of the cases. Here we have pennae as first declension nominative plural. Here we have penes as first declension accusative plural, namely the subject and direct object, respectively. Once again, if we were in the classroom, it would be more sensible to point out through a chart, but in this format, it just gets a little bit clumsy at times, so you'll have to pause the video and study the declensions using the chart on your own if you don't have them fully in command or memorized. And then the last part here is noli nimis audex esse in volando. Noli, of course, means don't. Literally, don't excessively daring to be in flying. In other words, be cautious. Don't be a daredevil. But literally, you can come up with a more poetic translation, but literally don't excessively daring to be in flying. In other words, don't do more than you're capable of doing. Be cautious, cautus esto. Be cautious, my son. Now follow me. We are now fleeing from our prison. We may recall that Minos had imprisoned them there because he had helped Ariadne, who in turn helped Theseus, and we are free. And then here we have a ablative absolute, haec verba locutus, with these words having been spoken, literally these words spoken. Again, this is always one of the challenges between, or rather in translating Latin, as Latin likes to use a lot of participial phrases that are very periphrastic, whereas English prefers separate adjective clauses and separate clauses and a little bit more vocab. And so, but literally these words having been spoken. Or in English, when he had said these words, Daedalus flew out, a volavit, with his son, sursum, we said upwards, from the labyrinth. So flew out upwards from the labyrinth, nor whoever flee there noticed except some shepherd. So this one's a little bit tricky. And no one had noticed. So our verb here is animadvertit, means to notice something. So if you don't know that, you would have to look it up in a dictionary. And no one noticed their escape, eorum fugam, except some shepherd who, by chance, was looking at them, or was thinking them to be flying birds. So the shepherd, so Minos or his guards didn't notice. Just some shepherd who thought that it was some birds flying in the sky, or he thought it to be the gods. So because human beings can't fly, so he thought, well, maybe it's one of the gods, maybe it's Mercury, maybe it's Apollo. So arbitratus, of course, in law we have the idea of arbitration, but in arbitratus, S means thought, to them to be the gods. Soon, so once again, that's not the best translation, but the basic idea is clear. Soon father and son Crete left, nor indeed right way Athens in father there flew, but new liberty delighted in great earth above sea Aegeus to fly began. So that's our literal verbatim translation. Now we have to try to put this in a sense here that is a little bit stylistically more like English, but the basic idea is clear. So soon, father and son left Crete, where the labyrinth was, so they escaped from Crete, and they're eventually trying to get back to Athens. But at first they didn't want to go directly to Athens, their homeland, but were so delighted by their new liberty that they began to fly above the Aegean Sea, because they were taking delight in literally the entire world. So this sentence here is a little bit syntactically, you almost have to break it up. So let me just go over it literally again. So soon father and son Crete left, nor indeed right way to Athens in fatherland there they flew, but new freedom delighting in great orb world above sea Aegean to fly they begin. So the idea here is that instead of going straight to Athens, they said, well, let's just like traveling, I went to Vienna over Christmas break, before we went to Finland, and we said, well, since we're going to Finland, we might as well go to Vienna, and since we're going to Vienna, we might as well go to Tuscany, and since we're going to Tuscany, we might as well spend a couple hours in London. And so when you travel, sure, you can take a direct flight, but it's not that much more expensive since you're already doing it to take delight or to enjoy other places, since most of the cost and most of the time is for the initial destination. So that's the basic idea here. And so putting it in idiomatic English is soon the father and son left Crete, and but they didn't want to fly directly to their homeland of Athens because, I want to say because in English, but Latin says but they were so happy by their new freedom that they began to fly above the Aegean to look at the entire world. Icarus, looking down, so Despicians means, so here we have deorsum aspicere, so remember deorsum means down, so you can see the down arrow there. So they're up there flying around, and Icarus, looking down at literally the multitude of islands, because the Aegean is a set of islands, was amazed, Maratoses, and he says, oh, how many small islands in such a large sea. And so, oh, look at all the islands down there in that large sea. And Daedalus says, indeed, or almost he's contradicting his son once again. So those islands are hardly small, although they seem to be small. So this is where, of course, Icarus his judgment starts to wane because of his lack of perception. Which again, if we were in class, we could talk more about that, but here we'll just continue with our reading. So Daedalus indeed says those islands are hardly small, although they seem to be small. Then he continues, certainly that the island of Melos, which is below us now, so infra means below, is not so small as it seems to you. So it is not so small, nam tam parva es, as it seems to you, quam tibi vedite. And then Icarus says, but that island, which to us from left is much bigger to be to me seems. Again, that's a literal translation, but again, I think we need the literal so we get the vocab. If we don't know the vocab, then any reading or translation is just not possible. So once we have that vocab, but that island, which is to the left of us, seems to me a lot larger. And then Daedalus says, well, what island is that? Quaes illa insulae. And then he says it is the Peloponnesian, a part of Greece. Is not an island, but a peninsula. So here he's giving his son a kind of geography lesson, if you will. So it's not an island, but a peninsula that you see. And then he describes what a peninsula is. He says, for the Peloponnesian is a narrow land, so terra angusta. Angusta means narrow, which, and then isthmus, which is an isthmus, just like in English. So which, I turn the page here, which is called an isthmus since it is connected to the rest of Greece. And then prope, of course, means near, followed by the accusative. So second declension, accusative singular is So near the isthmus is, or rather near the isthmus, Corinth is located, literally is situated. And what is Corinth? It is a most beautiful city, a very beautiful city. Once again, probably in English, you might put a period here, but Latin just keeps going. Nor are they far away from Athens, namely Peloponnesian and Corinth, from Athens, our homeland. So remember, they're trying to get to Athens, but they're taking a sightseeing expedition first. Si altius volibimus non solum Graeciam sed pennae totum orbum terrarum spectabimus, inquit puer temerios atque etiam altius se levavit. Illic non solum magnes Europae et Asia partes despiciebat marrans, verum etiam oram Africae procul, cernebat diende supre se solum in caelo sereno lucentem suspexit, statum puer cupido solum propios aspigienti, quam pater eam mono errat in summum caelum ascendit. So the islands are not far from Athens. So here we have our ablative of separation. If we want to go higher, like altitude, we will see spectabimus not only Greece, but literally all of the entire world, all the lands of the world, but almost sight totum orbum terrarum. He says, and the foolish boy, like temerity, means too much, in this case hubris, too much audacity. But we do have the word temerity in English. So the the um, the errant boy literally lifted himself up higher. So levavit, like to levitate himself higher. So remember his father had warned him not to go too high, but you can sort of see here he doesn't listen because he's enamored by seeing all of the world. And from there, he was looking down, so despikiebant, not only literally the great parts of Europe and Asia. So he's looking at kind of Europe and Asia and its component parts, its great parts. So literally there, not only large of Europe and Asia parts, was looking down amazed. So he was amazed flying above in the heavens at the lands of Europe and Asia, that he was also able to see the shores of Africa. So ora means shores. So indeed, also the shores of Africa, far away, was discerning. So in the distance, he could also see the shores of Africa. Then, above himself, he was able to see, suspexit, the serene or tranquil light of the sun in the heavens. So he's flying so high that he can actually see the light of the sun. And at once the boy, desiring, we had this earlier in the thesis in Minotaur, desiring to go even closer to the sun, to see the sun even more closely, you might say. Literally, at once, boy desiring sun nearer of seeing. So at once the boy desiring to see the sun even more closely, although his father had advised him against it, had advised him not to, quamquam father munerat him, he ascended high up into the sky. Ascendit in summum caelum ascendit. And then here Quintus, remember he's the young boy, who was anxiously awaiting to hear the end of the story, asked, well, what happened then? What happened then? Quid tuum accidit? Well, what happened then is, I think we know, but you're going to read this on your own, because for your next homework assignment is you will have to read the rest of the story. Again, I apologize. I'm not sure why this has automatically appeared. And then, so you'll have to pause this to get this screenshot. And then you'll have some reading comprehension questions. You don't need to do the last one, 1 through 10. Now, we've actually covered in our readings, in what you've done thus far, the first 8 questions. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We've done the first 8. The last 2 are in the part that we just left off. So these reading comprehension questions are as follows. Who orders Daedalus to be imprisoned in the labyrinth? How does Daedalus decide to escape? Why are men not able to fly? Literally, from which things or from which materials does, remember Latin doesn't use do or does, Daedalus make the wings? Why are the wings of Icarus not able to, literally, to sustain him or to enable him to fly? What does, or what do the father and son, what did they see? What do the flying father and son see? What did they see while flying is probably how we just have to say it in English. And then Esne, as you know, ne is an enclitic yes-no question. Is the Peloponnese a large island? Just went over that. Quaere means why or how. Why does Icarus ascend high up into the sky? What happens to the boy? There's our dative. So second declension, dative singular, us, eo. What happens to the boy then? And then where is the body of the boy found? When Ventimus is found. So let me go back to the beginning, because you might have to pause this video so you have all of the text. And so here is the first page. Again, don't forget the notes are very helpful. So again, you may have to pause this. I'm not going to keep it here for an extended period of time. And then the next page is, next two pages are right here. This is where we started today. This was what you did for homework last time. And then the last pages are right here. The last pages of the reading. And then, of course, the reading comprehension. They do have a brief, in this book, a brief description of grammar, but in my experience, tends not to be all that helpful. So we have not discussed that. It's just the gerunds, which is basically a verbal noun, of plus ing. Okay. Well, please post your questions on Blackboard, or email me if you have questions about this chapter, about the reading, about the homework. As noted, next week will be a review week, so please take that time to study this chapter and the last chapter, the two stories and the Latin therein. I'll talk a little bit more per email next week about what the test will look like. It'll be a little different than obviously the tests in the Wheelocks, but it should be actually easier. I think the Latin is easier just because there's more of a story or a context. But I will spell that out in my email next week, so that you know what to expect and you can prepare accordingly.